This exhibition really, I suppose, covers a 10-year or so period, right at the beginning of my career as a sculptor, if you like, starting from about 1953 or so. It was a very prolific period. It was quite seminal as far as the rest of my career was concerned, actually, as a sculptor, and goes through quite a surprising range. I worked very hard as a student, and John Skeeping was in contact with Zadkine in Paris, and he arranged an exchange for me to work at Zadkine's studio. And I was given an introduction by John Berger to Raymond Mason, so I rented his studio flat in the Place de la Sorbonne in Paris, which was a marvellously romantic and exotic place to work. And I used to walk across the Luxembourg Gardens to the Académie de la Grande Chaumière, which is where I actually did my sculpture, any serious sculpture. They had a life class every day, and you paid to go into the life class, so there were always models there. And artists like Zadkine and Bourdelle used to go in one day a week and give a criticism to all the students who were working in the studios. And it was an admirable way to work, and I always felt that it was a mistake that the English art system didn't accommodate such a flexible and easy way to work, actually. I was lonely in Paris because my French was very inadequate at the time, and living on wind virtually. I mean, I used to go out and sit in the Luxembourg Gardens, and for lunch I would have an orange and a loaf of bread and a bar of cheap chocolate, and would sit and sketch people. And it was, I don't know, isolating and lonely, but very, very intense. Before I went to Paris, I was given an introduction by Lillian Browse to Madame Goldscheider, who was the curator of the Musée Rodin. And Madame Goldscheider gave me a permit to go and study Rodin's old studio, which was out at Meudon, where you could see all his original plasters. And that was marvellous, because not only all the plasters, there were all the sketches and maquettes, dozens of them. And it was like discovering a whole civilization. It was quite unlike the official museum, and quite illegally. I used to climb down the lift shaft at Meudon into the basement, where everything was stacked up in racks, and spent hours there, so I could pick up and examine and handle all these fragments and hands and heads and limbs, and that was terribly exciting, actually. A lot of the work that's on the show in this exhibition dates from this sort of period, when I was in Paris and brought a number of small pieces of sculpture back and one major piece of sculpture back, which is the mother and child. I crated it up and somehow got it back to England in a crate and finished it off at the Royal College. There was one very impressive piece of sculpture by Germaine Richer in the Musée d'Art Moderne called L'Orage, the storm, or storm man, if you like, actually. And I was amazed by it because it was rough and craggy, totally unlike Rodin, for example. Also totally unlike Giacometti. Giacometti's work was very thin and very curious and introspective, actually. I met Giacometti putting up his first one-man show when I was in Paris at the Galerie Macht. And I remember going there one Saturday afternoon when he was setting it up. And he was a very amiable little man, absolutely charming. My French was poor, but it didn't matter. There was a rapport immediately. And he was much more important to me than any other sculptors that I'd come across, apart from Germaine Richer. I suppose my mother and child was more affected, if you like, by Germaine Richer certainly than by Rodin, possibly by Giacometti. All the rest of the work that I did at the Royal College was based on what had happened to me in Paris, actually. And things like the Clochard, for example, which is an important piece of sculpture, based on drawings that I'd made of down and outs and beggars. The clochards were the real down and outs, so we're sleeping on metro gratings to keep warm, actually, at night. Very tragic creatures, actually. When I left the Royal College, Henry Moore had bought The Mother and Child from me, which was a stroke of tremendous good luck. And then a piece of sculpture was bought from me by the Harlow Arts Trust, who were building their new town at the time, a piece of sculpture called A Man Shearing a Sheep. And they then commissioned me to make a large piece of sculpture for Harlow Market Square, which resulted in the large ox carriers being made. And it struck me as markets are about rather brutal things and rather earthy things and not about neat, nice new towns. And so I thought it would be rather nice to make an explosion of some sort in the middle of the market square, which asserted this. It's more expressive than a simple realist piece of sculpture would be. But it also incorporates a lot of feelings that I had about landscape and rocks and cliffs and things, because at that time I was and had been doing a lot of rock climbing and caving and this sort of thing, which all come into the same piece of sculpture. One feels the human form under the landscape. I mean, it's lying there like a beast that's about to move, if you like. Actually, so one is very well aware of that. And with the cliffs and caves, you're well aware of it, that it's got not only an exterior but an interior as well, actually. But the figure has always been at the basis of my work in any case, actually, simply because I love the figure. I love the human figure. I love drawing it. I love looking at it. I always remember the first time before I even went to art school, I remember going to life classes, and the first time I ever saw a female nude and looked at, because I didn't know much about girls, actually, then, and, actually seeing a female breast, I thought, wow, what is this? This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I still think that, I mean, apart from buttocks. When I was first teaching, I was trying to explain to students how you could get a lot of movement into a simple standing figure, not by making it gesticulate, not by making it caper, but within the forms of a static figure. If you use the forms in certain sorts of ways, movement would come into the figure. The way that the forms split and divided would get movement into this static form without actually having to demonstrate it in a sort of naturalistic sort of way. Because I played games with the heads in this sort of way, it also helped with the things like the Seated Queen, actually, and the subsequent Queen series. Because I'd already done one or two reasonably successful commissions, I entered a competition for a piece of sculpture to go in front of Peterborough Cathedral, and I won the competition, but unfortunately for all sorts of political reasons it fell through, and so I only ever made the small maquette for it. But I always liked it and I always felt it was an important piece of sculpture. But the nice thing is that the Pangolin Foundry said, would you like to make the Seated Queen on a large scale? I said, I always wanted to. And he said, well, now you can, and we will help you to do it. And I was daunted at first. I thought, it's going to be rather tiresome doing this. It hasn't been tiresome at all. It's been absolutely liberating. I called it the Queen because it had got this strange, barbaric headdress, and it looked like some sort of primitive, magisterial, regal figure, carrying all sorts of overtones to do with cruelty, savagery, femininity, sexuality, so that it reminded you of things like the Empress of China or Catherine the Great or Queen Elizabeth I. Going back and revisiting work that I did 40 years ago, which I thought would be a tiresome thing to do, has in fact been a totally invigorating thing to do. And looking back at the intensity of vision that I had in making the drawings, then making the sculptures, it's as if you're re-entering the mind of another person, but it's not of another person, it's the same person. And it's like a key that opens a door into rooms that you'd long left. And you're suddenly able to see what was in the room again, and probably see it with a brighter light. It's given me a new vision into what I can do with my hands, if you like, actually, if I've got time to do it.